Close your eyes, and let yourself settle into comfort. Tonight, we're going to journey together through the gentle wisdom of Buddhism, a path that has brought peace to countless souls across more than 2.5 millennia. Our story begins in a place of great privilege, in a kingdom nestled at the foot of the Himalayas, in what is now Nepal. Here, around the year 563 BCE, a child was born into luxury and protection. His name was Siddhartha Gautama, and he would one day become known as the Buddha, which means the awakened one. But that awakening was still many years away. Siddhartha's father was a king, a ruler of the Sakya clan, and he wanted nothing more than for his son to follow in his footsteps. Ancient texts tell us that astrologers made a prediction at Siddhartha's birth. This child would become either a great king or a great spiritual teacher. His father, determined to secure the first outcome, resolved to shield his son from anything that might turn his thoughts towards spiritual matters. And so, Siddhartha grew up in unimaginable comfort, surrounded by 3 palaces built for different seasons, each one designed to provide every pleasure and luxury. He was educated in all the arts a prince should know. He married a beautiful woman named Yasodhara, and in time, they had a son together named Rahula. By all worldly measures, Siddhartha's life was perfect, complete, lacking nothing. But perfection built on sheltering someone from truth is fragile, and it cannot last forever. When Siddhartha was 29 years old, he ventured beyond the palace walls, and there he encountered what would become known as the 4 sights. On his first journey outside, he saw an old man, bent with age, and he realized for the first time that all beings grow old. On another excursion, he witnessed a sick person, suffering with disease, and understood that illness comes to everyone. Then he saw a corpse being carried to cremation, and the reality of death struck him deeply. These 3 sights shattered the illusion his father had so carefully constructed. Youth fades, health fails, and death comes to all. But there was a 4th sight, one that offered hope. Siddhartha saw a wandering ascetic, a spiritual seeker who had renounced worldly life, and despite having nothing, this person radiated a profound peace. In that moment, Siddhartha understood that there might be a way beyond suffering, and he knew he had to find it. In what Buddhists call the Great Renunciation, Siddhartha left his palace, his wife, his infant son, and all his privileges behind. In the middle of the night, he departed on his horse with his charioteer, and at the edge of the forest, he cut off his long hair with his sword, exchanged his royal robes for simple clothes, and sent his companion back. He was no longer Prince Siddhartha. He was now a seeker, walking toward an unknown destination. For the next 6 years, Siddhartha studied with the greatest spiritual teachers of his time, mastering meditation techniques that allowed him to reach extraordinary states of consciousness. But these states, profound as they were, didn't provide the complete answer he sought. So he turned to extreme asceticism, joining a group of monks who believed that punishing the body would liberate the spirit. He ate so little that it said his spine could be felt through his stomach. He pushed himself to the very edge of death. And yet, enlightenment did not come. One day, exhausted and weakened, Siddhartha accepted a bowl of rice milk from a village girl named Sujata. As he ate, nourishing his body, a realization came to him. The path to awakening wasn't through luxury and indulgence, nor was it through extreme deprivation and suffering. The answer lay somewhere in between, in what he would later call the middle way, a balanced approach that avoided both extremes. His fellow ascetics, seeing him eat, believed he had given up and abandoned him. But Siddhartha continued alone, now following his own intuition. He walked until he came to a large fig tree near the town of Bodhi in India. There, he spread a mat of grass and sat down beneath the tree's spreading branches. And he made a vow: he would not rise from that spot until he had found the truth he sought, even if it cost him his life. Let yourself breathe slowly now, as Siddhartha sat breathing beneath that tree. The sun set, and night fell around him. And in the stillness of that night, after years of searching, after trying every path others had laid before him, Siddhartha finally turned inward with complete determination. We'll continue this journey in a moment, but for now, simply rest with this image: a man sitting peacefully beneath a tree, seeking answers not in distant places or extreme practices, but in the quiet depths of his own awareness. And so, beneath that sacred fig tree, Siddhartha sat in deep meditation through the night. The tree would later be known as the Bodhi tree, the tree of awakening, and it still stands in Bodh Gaya today, a descendant of that original tree, visited by pilgrims from around the world who come to sit in the presence of that ancient moment. As Siddhartha meditated, Buddhist tradition tells us he was tested by Mara, a figure representing illusion, desire, and death. Mara sent his armies to frighten Siddhartha, his daughters to tempt him, and finally questioned his very right to seek enlightenment. But Siddhartha remained unmoved, seated in perfect stillness. When Mara demanded to know what gave him the authority to pursue awakening, Siddhartha simply reached down and touched the earth with his right hand, calling the earth itself to witness his countless lifetimes of preparation. This gesture, known as the earth-touching mudra, became one of the most iconic images in Buddhist art, symbolizing the moment of unshakable resolve. As dawn approached, Siddhartha's mind became progressively clearer and more luminous. In the first watch of the night, he perceived all his previous lives, understanding the continuity of existence across countless births. In the second watch, he developed what Buddhists call the divine eye, the ability to see how beings are reborn according to their actions, their karma. And in the third watch of the night, as the morning star appeared in the eastern sky, he finally understood. He saw clearly the chain of causation that binds all beings to suffering, how ignorance leads to craving, craving leads to attachment, attachment leads to suffering, and suffering perpetuates the cycle of rebirth. And in seeing this clearly, he also saw how to break the chain. At that moment, at the age of 35, Siddhartha Gautama became the Buddha, the awakened one. The man who had been searching was gone, replaced by someone who had found what all beings seek: complete liberation from suffering. For 7 weeks, the Buddha remained near the Bodhi tree, sitting in the bliss of his newfound freedom. Buddhist texts describe how he sat in different locations around the tree, contemplating different aspects of his realization, basking in the peace of nirvana. At first, he questioned whether he should even attempt to teach what he had discovered. What he had realized was so subtle, so contrary to ordinary thinking, that he doubted anyone would understand it. The truth was profound and difficult, while people were attached to their pleasures and their habitual ways of thinking. But according to tradition, Brahma Sahampati, a high divinity in Indian cosmology, appeared before the Buddha and pleaded with him to teach. Brahma reminded him that there would be some beings with little dust in their eyes who could understand, and who would suffer without this teaching. Moved by compassion, the Buddha agreed. He would spend the remaining 45 years of his life traveling throughout northeastern India, sharing what he had learned. The Buddha's first teaching was given in a deer park in Sarnath, near the city of Varanasi. There, he found the 5 ascetics who had abandoned him when he gave up extreme practices. They approached him skeptically, but as he began to speak, they recognized something had fundamentally changed. What he taught them that day became known as the Four Noble Truths, the foundation of all Buddhist teaching. These truths are simple to state but profound to understand. The first noble truth is that life contains dukkha, often translated as suffering, but meaning something broader: unsatisfactoriness, stress, the quality of never being quite complete or permanent. Birth is difficult, aging is difficult, illness is difficult, death is difficult. Even pleasant experiences are tinged with dukkha because they cannot last. The second noble truth explains the origin of this suffering. It arises from tanha, which means craving or thirst. We crave pleasure and we crave to avoid pain. We thirst for experiences, for existence itself, and we cling to things that are constantly changing. This clinging to what cannot be held, this desire for permanence in an impermanent world, creates our suffering. The third noble truth offers hope: there is an end to suffering. This cessation is called nirvana, a word that literally means blowing out or extinguishing, like a flame going out. It's not annihilation, but rather the extinguishing of craving, of ignorance, of all the fires that burn within us. It is perfect peace, and it is attainable. And the fourth noble truth provides the path. There is a way to reach this cessation, and it is called the Noble Eightfold Path. This path isn't a series of steps to climb one after another, but rather 8 interconnected practices to develop together: right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. The word right here means something like complete or skillful, actions and thoughts that lead toward awakening rather than toward further suffering. These 5 ascetics became the Buddha's first disciples, the beginning of the Buddhist monastic community, called the Sangha. This Sangha would grow throughout the Buddha's life, eventually numbering in the thousands. It included not just monks but also nuns, for the Buddha established one of the first known orders of female monastics in India, though this decision came only after much persuasion from his aunt and foster mother, Mahapajapati Gautami, who became the first Buddhist nun. Let your breathing deepen now, as we rest with these teachings. Imagine them like gentle rain falling on parched earth, simple truths that have the power to transform everything. The Buddha walked the dusty roads of India, teaching in villages and cities, in forests and palaces, to anyone who would listen with an open heart. And slowly, steadily, his message spread. The Buddha's teaching style was remarkable in its adaptability. He didn't deliver the same sermon to everyone he met. Instead, he tailored his teachings to each person's capacity for understanding, their circumstances, and their needs. To a grieving mother who had lost her child, he taught about the universality of death. To a king concerned with governance, he taught about ethical leadership. To ascetics pursuing extreme practices, he taught the middle way. This skillful approach became a hallmark of Buddhist teaching, the understanding that truth must be communicated in ways that meet people where they are. One of the most revolutionary aspects of the Buddha's teaching was his rejection of the caste system that dominated Indian society. In that time and place, a person's birth determined their entire life, their occupation, their social standing, even their spiritual potential. The priestly Brahmin caste claimed exclusive access to religious authority. But the Buddha declared that spiritual awakening was available to anyone, regardless of birth. He said that a person's worth was determined not by their family lineage but by their actions, their intentions, and their character. When people joined the monastic sangha, they left their caste identity behind, a radical act of social equality. The Buddha was also revolutionary in his approach to belief and doctrine. Unlike many religious teachers, he encouraged questioning and personal investigation rather than blind faith. In a famous teaching called the Kalama Sutta, he told a group of villagers confused by contradictory teachings, "Don't accept something just because it's in scriptures, or because it's tradition, or because a teacher says it, or even because I say it. Test teachings against your own experience. If something leads to harm and suffering, abandon it. If something leads to welfare and happiness, adopt it." This emphasis on personal verification and direct experience became central to Buddhist practice. As the Buddha traveled and taught, certain places became particularly significant. He spent many rainy seasons in Savatthi, a prosperous city where a wealthy merchant named Anathapindika purchased a grove of trees called Jetavana and donated it to the Sangha. This became one of the Buddha's favorite teaching locations, and it's said that he delivered more discourses there than anywhere else. The tradition of monastics staying in one place during the 3-month rainy season continues to this day in many Buddhist countries, a time for intensive study and practice. The Buddha's daily routine was simple but structured. He would wake before dawn and spend time in meditation. After sunrise, he and his monks would walk in a line to nearby villages or towns, carrying their begging bowls to collect food. This wasn't begging in the sense of pleading, but rather a silent offering of an opportunity for lay people to gain merit by supporting those dedicated to spiritual practice. The monks would eat their one meal of the day before noon, then spend the afternoon teaching, counseling, and meditating. Evenings were reserved for instructing the monks. This rhythm of practice, teaching, and community care created a sustainable way of life dedicated to awakening. Among the Buddha's many teachings, one concept stands out for its profundity: anatta, or non-self. The Buddha observed that everything we identify as me or mine is actually constantly changing. Our bodies change every moment, our feelings come and go, our thoughts arise and pass away. Even our sense of personality shifts over time. If we look carefully, we cannot find any permanent, unchanging essence that is truly us. This isn't a nihilistic teaching but rather a liberating one. Much of our suffering comes from trying to protect and defend a self that doesn't exist in the way we think it does. Understanding non-self loosens the grip of ego and opens the door to freedom. Connected to this teaching is the concept of anicca, or impermanence. The Buddha taught that everything in existence is in constant flux. Nothing remains the same from one moment to the next. Mountains erode, empires fall, thoughts arise and dissolve, even our cells are continuously dying and being replaced. The Buddha famously said that you cannot step into the same river twice, for it's not the same river and you're not the same person. This impermanence isn't meant to be depressing but rather a call to be present, to appreciate what's here now, and to not cling desperately to what cannot be held. The third mark of existence, along with non-self and impermanence, is dukkha, that unsatisfactoriness we encountered earlier. These three characteristics, impermanence, non-self, and suffering, are said to mark all conditioned existence. Understanding them deeply is essential to awakening. They're not philosophical abstractions but observations about the nature of lived experience, meant to be contemplated and verified through one's own awareness. The Buddha also taught extensively about karma, though his understanding of it was more nuanced than simple reward and punishment. Karma literally means action, and the law of karma is essentially the law of cause and effect applied to intentional actions. Every action driven by intention creates consequences, not through some cosmic judge keeping score, but through the natural unfolding of causality. Wholesome actions, those rooted in generosity, loving-kindness, and wisdom, lead to happiness in favorable circumstances. Unwholesome actions, those rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion, lead to suffering. But karma isn't fate. Each moment offers a new choice, a new opportunity to create different causes and therefore different effects. The past influences but doesn't determine the present. As years passed, the Buddha's fame grew, and his Sangha expanded across the kingdoms of northeastern India. Kings became his patrons, offering protection and resources. Wealthy merchants donated parks and monasteries. Thousands of monks and nuns took ordination. But the Buddha remained essentially unchanged by this success, continuing to live simply, walking from place to place, teaching anyone who wished to learn. He would sit beneath trees, just as he had under the Bodhi tree, and share the path he had discovered. Throughout his teaching career, which lasted 45 years, the Buddha gave countless discourses. These were memorized by his disciples and passed down orally for several centuries before finally being written down. Today, these teachings fill many volumes and address an extraordinary range of topics: meditation techniques, ethical conduct, the nature of consciousness, the workings of karma, the stages of awakening, and much more. Yet they all point toward the same goal: liberation from suffering. Let yourself rest now in the simplicity of these teachings. Impermanence, non-self, the possibility of freedom. Like water wearing away stone, these truths gradually reshape our understanding. And so the Buddha continued, year after year, walking the path he had discovered, inviting others to walk it with him, one step at a time. Among the Buddha's disciples, certain individuals stood out for their particular qualities and attainments. There was Siddhartha, considered the wisest of all the Buddha's students, who had a gift for analyzing and organizing the teachings into systematic frameworks. There was Moggallana, Sariputa's close friend, known for his mastery of meditation and psychic powers. There was Ananda, the Buddha's devoted personal attendant for the last 25 years of his life, who was blessed with perfect memory and could recall every teaching he had heard. And there was Mahakassapa, an austere and disciplined monk who would play a crucial role in preserving the teachings after the Buddha's death. The Buddha's own family eventually joined the Sangha in various ways. His son Rahula, whom he had left behind as an infant, ordained as a novice monk while still a child and eventually became an awakened disciple. His cousin Ananda became that faithful attendant we just mentioned. And another cousin, Devdutta, joined the order but later became a source of conflict, attempting to take over leadership of the Sangha and even, according to tradition, trying to kill the Buddha. These family dynamics remind us that the Buddha's path wasn't removed from ordinary human complexity but arose within it and addressed it. The Buddha developed a sophisticated understanding of meditation, distinguishing between two primary types of practice. The first is samatha, or calm abiding meditation, which cultivates concentration, tranquility, and peace. Through samatha practice, the mind becomes steady and unified, capable of resting on a single object without distraction. The second type is vipassana, or insight meditation, which cultivates clear seeing into the nature of reality. Vipassana reveals the three marks of existence: impermanence, non-self, and unsatisfactoriness, through direct observation. Both types of meditation support each other. Concentration provides the stability needed for insight, while insight deepens and purifies concentration. The Buddha described 8 progressive stages of meditative absorption called jhanas. In these states, the mind becomes increasingly refined, letting go of sensory awareness and even of ordinary thought, entering realms of profound peace and clarity. The first jhana includes joy and happiness along with sustained attention. The second jhana moves beyond thought into pure joy. The third jhana transcends even joy into a subtle contentment. The fourth jhana rests in perfect equanimity. Beyond these are 4 formless jhanas, states of consciousness so refined they're described as boundless space, boundless consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception nor non-perception. Yet the Buddha taught that even these exalted states weren't liberation itself, for when the meditation ends, one returns to ordinary consciousness. True freedom required insight, not just concentrated states. Another powerful practice the Buddha taught is metta, or loving-kindness meditation. This practice involves systematically cultivating goodwill, first toward oneself, then toward loved ones, then toward neutral people, then toward difficult people, and finally toward all beings everywhere. The traditional phrases go something like, "May I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be safe, may I live with ease." Then the same wishes extend outward in ever-widening circles. This isn't mere positive thinking but a genuine transformation of heart, dissolving the barriers we construct between ourselves and others. Along with loving kindness, the Buddha taught compassion for those who suffer, sympathetic joy for those who are happy, and equanimity toward all of life's ups and downs. The Buddha's teachings on ethics were equally profound. He established 5 basic precepts for lay people: refrain from killing, refrain from stealing, refrain from sexual misconduct, refrain from false speech, and refrain from intoxicants that cloud the mind. These aren't commandments handed down by a deity but training guidelines that support awakening. Each precept protects both oneself and others from harm. Not killing cultivates reverence for life. Not stealing cultivates generosity and contentment. Sexual responsibility cultivates respect and restraint. Truthful speech cultivates trust and integrity. And a clear mind cultivates wisdom. For monastics, the precepts were more extensive, with over 200 training rules governing every aspect of life, from how to eat to how to wear robes to how to interact with others. The Buddha spoke often about the middle way, not just as a path between extreme asceticism and indulgence, but as a balanced approach to all aspects of life. This appears in his teaching on right effort, which involves 4 practices: preventing unwholesome states from arising, abandoning unwholesome states that have arisen, cultivating wholesome states, and maintaining wholesome states that have developed. Notice the balance. We don't just suppress negativity, and we don't just cultivate positivity. We work skillfully with both, neither forcing nor neglecting, like a gardener who both pulls weeds and waters flowers. As the Buddha aged, he remained vigorous in body and mind, but he was not immune to physical decline. Buddhist texts record that he suffered from back pain in his later years and occasionally needed to rest. Once, when he was ill, he told his monks that he had to make a deliberate effort to maintain his body, using concentration to ease his discomfort. This honesty about the body's vulnerability was itself a teaching. Even the Buddha experienced the reality of impermanence in his own flesh. Awakening doesn't make you immune to life's challenges, it changes your relationship to them. In his 80th year, the Buddha knew his time was coming to an end. He embarked on one final journey with Ananda and a group of monks, traveling north toward the place where he would die. Along the way, he continued teaching, continued accepting offerings of food and shelter, continued living each moment with full presence. In a town called Pava, a blacksmith named Kunda offered the Buddha a meal. Shortly after eating this meal, the Buddha became seriously ill with what Buddhist texts describe as a severe digestive affliction. Despite his suffering, the Buddha insisted they continue their journey. They reached a grove of sala trees near the town of Kusinara, and there, between two trees, the Buddha asked Ananda to prepare a couch. He lay down on his right side, in the posture of a resting lion, and gathered his monks around him for final instructions. He told them not to think that they would be without a teacher after his death. The Dhamma, the teaching, would be their teacher. He encouraged them to be islands unto themselves, to rely on the teachings and on their own direct experience. He reminded them that all conditioned things are impermanent, and urged them to work out their liberation with diligence. These were his final words: all conditioned things are subject to decay. Strive on with diligence. And then, moving through the meditative jhanas one by one, ascending through progressively refined states of consciousness and then descending again, the Buddha passed into final nirvana, called parinirvana. It was the full moon night of the month of Visakha, the same month in which, according to tradition, he had been born and had attained enlightenment. He was 80 years old, and he had spent more than half his life teaching the path to freedom from suffering. Rest now with this image, a teacher lying peacefully beneath flowering trees, having given everything he had discovered, having held nothing back, having pointed the way for anyone who wished to follow. The Buddha was gone, but his teaching remained, carried forward by those who had heard him, who had practiced with him, who had glimpsed what he had seen. In the immediate aftermath of the Buddha's passing, his body was cremated with great ceremony in Kusinara. Kings and commoners alike came to pay their respects. According to tradition, his relics, bone fragments that remained after cremation, were divided into 8 portions and distributed to different kingdoms, where stupas, or memorial mounds, were built to house them. These stupas became pilgrimage sites, physical places where people could connect with the Buddha's memory and teaching. Over time, the stupa became one of the most important architectural forms in Buddhism, evolving into elaborate structures like pagodas in East Asia, each one representing the Buddha's presence and the path to enlightenment. Shortly after the Buddha's death, his senior disciple Mahakassapa called together 500 awakened monks for what would become known as the First Buddhist Council. They gathered in a cave near Rajagaha during the rainy season, and there they undertook a monumental task, systematically reciting and verifying all of the Buddha's teachings and all the monastic rules. Ananda, with his perfect memory, recited the suttas, the discourses, beginning each one with the phrase "Thus have I heard," indicating he had heard these words directly from the Buddha. Another monk named Upali recited the Vinaya, the monastic code. The assembly of awakened monks verified each recitation, ensuring accuracy. This oral preservation would continue for centuries, with monks memorizing vast collections of teachings and passing them down generation by generation with remarkable precision. In the centuries following the Buddha's death, his teachings spread gradually throughout India and beyond. Different communities began to interpret certain aspects of the teachings in different ways, not out of conflict but out of genuine philosophical inquiry and emphasis. Some communities stressed strict adherence to monastic discipline, while others emphasized philosophical analysis. Some focused on the Buddha's human qualities as a teacher, while others began to develop more elaborate cosmologies. By about 100 years after the Buddha's death, the Sangha held a second Buddhist council to address some of these differences, particularly regarding monastic rules. This was the beginning of what would eventually become different schools of Buddhism, each preserving the core teachings but expressing them in unique ways. One of the major early divisions in Buddhism was between what came to be called Theravada and Mahayana. Theravada, meaning the teaching of the elders, emphasized the original Pali texts and held closely to the earliest forms of practice. It focused on individual liberation, on monastics as the primary practitioners, and on the historical Buddha as the teacher. This tradition eventually took root in Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos, where it remains the dominant form of Buddhism today. The word Theravada itself reflects a commitment to preserving what these communities understood as the authentic, original teachings. Mahayana Buddhism, meaning the Great Vehicle, emerged several centuries after the Buddha's death, though its adherents believe it represents teachings the Buddha gave but which were only revealed when the time was right. Mahayana placed greater emphasis on the bodhisattva ideal, the practitioner who vows not to enter final nirvana until all beings can be liberated together. It developed elaborate philosophies about the nature of emptiness and Buddha nature, the idea that all beings possess the potential for awakening. Mahayana also expanded the concept of the Buddha, teaching that there are many Buddhas across different times and dimensions, not just the historical Shakyamuni Buddha. This tradition spread north from India into Tibet, China, Korea, Japan, and Vietnam, adapting to each culture it encountered. In the 3rd century BCE, a pivotal moment in Buddhist history occurred when Emperor Ashoka of the Mauryan Empire converted to Buddhism. Ashoka had been a fierce warrior who conquered vast territories through violence, but after a particularly brutal campaign in Kalinga that left hundreds of thousands dead, he was overcome with remorse. He turned to Buddhism and devoted the rest of his reign to Dharma, to righteous rule based on Buddhist principles. He erected pillars throughout his empire inscribed with edicts promoting nonviolence, religious tolerance, care for animals, and ethical conduct. He sent missionaries, including his own son and daughter, to spread Buddhism to Sri Lanka and beyond. Ashoka's support transformed Buddhism from a regional teaching to a religion with international reach, and his reign is often remembered as a golden age when government and spiritual values aligned. Around the 1st century CE, Buddhist texts began to be written down for the first time. Until then, everything had been preserved orally, passed from teacher to student through careful memorization and recitation. The decision to commit the teachings to writing happened in Sri Lanka, where monks worried that wars, famines, and the passing of time might cause the teachings to be lost. They inscribed the Pali Canon, the Tipitaka, or 3 baskets, containing the Buddha's discourses, the monastic rules, and scholastic commentaries, onto palm leaves. This written record helped preserve and standardize the teachings, though oral transmission remained important. Today, the Pali Canon is the most complete early Buddhist scriptural collection we have, filling dozens of volumes in translation. Buddhism's journey to China began in the 1st century CE, when merchants and monks traveled the Silk Road carrying Buddhist texts and teachings. The encounter between Buddhism and Chinese culture was profound and complex. Chinese translators worked for centuries to render Sanskrit and Pali texts into Chinese, often struggling with concepts that had no easy equivalents. Buddhism had to find common ground with existing Chinese philosophies like Confucianism and Taoism. Initially, Buddhist ideas were sometimes explained using Taoist terminology, creating interesting fusions. Over time, distinctly Chinese forms of Buddhism emerged, such as Chan Buddhism, which emphasized direct experience and meditation, and Pure Land Buddhism, which focused on devotion to Amitabha Buddha and rebirth in his Pure Land, a realm conducive to achieving enlightenment. Chan Buddhism, which would later become Zen in Japan, deserves special mention for its unique approach. Chan masters emphasized that enlightenment couldn't be found in scriptures or rituals but only through direct insight into one's own nature. They developed teaching methods that seemed paradoxical or even nonsensical, famous koans like "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" or "What was your original face before your parents were born?" These weren't riddles to be solved intellectually but tools to short-circuit conceptual thinking and provoke sudden awakening. Chan also emphasized everyday activity as practice: chopping wood, carrying water, drinking tea. All of life could be meditation when done with full presence and awareness. From China, Buddhism spread to Korea in the 4th century CE and to Japan in the 6th century. In Japan, Buddhism encountered Shinto, the indigenous spiritual tradition, and the two coexisted, each influencing the other. Multiple schools of Buddhism established themselves in Japan: Tendai and Shingon with their esoteric practices and elaborate rituals, Pure Land with its emphasis on faith and devotion, Nichiren with its focus on the Lotus Sutra, and Zen with its stripped-down aesthetic and meditation practice. Each school offered a different path up the same mountain, different ways of engaging with the Buddha's core insights about suffering and liberation. Japanese culture absorbed Buddhist ideas deeply, influencing everything from art and poetry to architecture and the tea ceremony. Let yourself settle more deeply now, feeling the centuries flowing past like a gentle river, carrying these teachings from land to land, from heart to heart, each culture receiving them and making them their own. And still the teachings traveled onward, crossing mountains and deserts, oceans and borders, adapting but always pointing toward that same freedom the Buddha discovered beneath the Bodhi tree. Buddhism's journey to Tibet began in the 7th century CE, when King Songtsen Gampo married 2 Buddhist princesses, one from China and one from Nepal, both of whom brought Buddhist texts and images to Tibet. But Buddhism didn't truly take root until the 8th century, when the Indian master Padmasambhava arrived. Padmasambhava, whose name means lotus-born, was both a scholar and a tantric adept, skilled in practices that worked directly with the energies of body and mind. He traveled throughout Tibet, teaching and reportedly subduing local spirits and deities, not by destroying them but by converting them into protectors of the Dharma. His synthesis of Indian Buddhism with Tibet's indigenous Bon religion created Tibetan Buddhism, the unique tradition that would preserve and develop Buddhist teachings for over a millennium. Tibetan Buddhism developed several major schools, each with its own lineages and emphasis. The Nyingma school, the ancient ones, traced their teachings back to Padmasambhava himself. The Kagyu school emphasized meditation and the direct transmission of realization from teacher to student. The Sakya school became known for scholarship and for producing leaders who sometimes served as political rulers. And the Gelug school, founded by the reformer Tsongkhapa in the 14th century, stressed monastic discipline and systematic study, combining rigorous philosophical training with meditation practice. It was from the Gelug school that the institution of the Dalai Lama emerged, with each Dalai Lama understood to be a reincarnation of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. The concept of the Tulku, or reincarnate Lama, became a distinctive feature of Tibetan Buddhism. When a highly realized teacher died, their closest disciples would search for the child in whom that teacher's consciousness had taken rebirth. They would look for signs, consult oracles, and test young children to see if they recognized objects from their previous life. Once identified, these children would be trained from an early age to continue their predecessors' work. This system created lineages of leadership and teaching that could span centuries, providing continuity and preserving specific transmissions of wisdom. The current Dalai Lama, the 14th in his lineage, is perhaps the most famous example of this tradition, recognized as a tulku when he was just a small child in eastern Tibet. Tibetan Buddhism also developed an extensive collection of practices called tantras or vajrayana, the diamond vehicle. These practices worked with visualization, mantra, breath, and subtle energy channels in the body to accelerate the path to awakening. Practitioners would visualize themselves as enlightened deities, not out of ego but as a way of training the mind to recognize its own Buddha nature. They would repeat sacred syllables called mantras, like the famous Om Mani Padme Hum, the mantra of compassion. These practices were considered powerful and potentially dangerous, requiring careful guidance from a qualified teacher, or guru, who had themselves mastered the practices. The relationship between teacher and student became central in Tibetan Buddhism, with devotion to the guru seen as essential to progress on the path. While Buddhism flourished in many parts of Asia, its presence in India, the land of its birth, gradually declined. Several factors contributed to this. The Muslim invasions beginning in the 12th century destroyed many monasteries and universities. Hindu philosophical schools engaged Buddhism in debate and absorbed some Buddhist ideas while reasserting Hindu frameworks. And Buddhism's emphasis on renunciation and monasticism may have made it less rooted in household life compared to Hindu traditions. By the 13th century, Buddhism had largely disappeared from India, surviving mainly in the Himalayan regions and in Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia. It would not return to India in significant numbers until the 20th century, when Dr. B.R. Ambedkar led a mass conversion of Dalits, formerly called untouchables, to Buddhism as a path to dignity and equality. In Southeast Asia, Buddhism merged beautifully with local cultures. In Thailand, Burma, Cambodia, and Laos, Theravada Buddhism became the dominant religion, shaping national identities. Magnificent temples like Angkor Wat in Cambodia were built as cosmic maps, their architecture representing Mount Meru, the center of the Buddhist universe. In these countries, most young men would ordain as monks for a period, often just a few months, as a rite of passage into adulthood. This created societies where Buddhist values of compassion, generosity, and mindfulness were woven into the fabric of everyday life. Monks would walk on alms rounds each morning, and supporting them was seen as one of the highest forms of merit-making, creating a reciprocal relationship between monastics and lay people. The daily practice of mindfulness, so central to Buddhism, has a specific technical meaning that the Buddha outlined with great care. Mindfulness, or sati in Pali, is the quality of present moment awareness, of remembering to be present with what's actually happening rather than lost in thoughts about the past or future. The Buddha taught 4 foundations of mindfulness: mindfulness of the body, including awareness of breathing, posture, and physical sensations; mindfulness of feelings, noticing whether experiences are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral; mindfulness of mind states, observing when the mind is calm or agitated, clear or confused; and mindfulness of mental objects, particularly noticing patterns that lead to suffering or freedom. These 4 foundations form a complete meditation practice, a way of investigating experience that leads to insight and liberation. Buddhism also developed sophisticated understandings of consciousness itself. The Yogacara school, which emerged in India around the 4th century CE, proposed that all experience arises from consciousness, that what we think of as external reality is actually a projection of mental processes. They described 8 types of consciousness: the 5 sense consciousnesses, mental consciousness that thinks and plans, afflicted consciousness that creates the sense of self, and storehouse consciousness that holds all our karmic seeds and tendencies. This wasn't meant to deny the existence of an external world but to show how deeply our experience is shaped by mind. Understanding this can free us from taking our perceptions as absolute truth and help us see how we construct our reality moment by moment. Another profound development in Buddhist philosophy was the Madhyamaka school's teaching on emptiness, or shunyata. Founded by the Indian philosopher Nagarjuna around the 2nd century CE, this school taught that nothing has independent, inherent existence. Everything exists only in relationship, dependent on causes and conditions, on parts, and on the mind that conceives it. A table seems solid and independently real, but it depends on wood, which depends on trees, which depend on soil, water, and sunlight, which depend on countless other factors stretching back infinitely. It exists as table only because minds conceive it that way. This emptiness isn't nothingness but rather the absence of the independent self-nature we imagine things have. Seeing emptiness directly is liberating because it dissolves the solid sense of reality that causes us to cling and grasp. Throughout all these philosophical developments and cultural adaptations, the heart of Buddhism remained constant: the Buddha's invitation to investigate suffering and find freedom. Whether a practitioner chanted Amitabha's name in Pure Land Buddhism, sat in silent meditation in Zen, visualized deities in Tibetan practice, or walked mindfully on alms round in Theravada monasteries, the goal was always the same: awakening to truth, releasing attachment, and cultivating compassion for all beings. The many forms Buddhism took across Asia weren't contradictions but expressions of the same insight flowering in different soils, each one offering a path suited to different temperaments and cultures. Let your mind rest now like a leaf floating on water, carried by the current of these teachings, not grasping, not resisting, simply present to this moment. and the Dharma continued to flow, moving with time like a great river, sometimes quiet and deep, sometimes breaking into many streams, but always moving toward the ocean of awakening. In the 20th century, Buddhism encountered the modern Western world in ways that would transform both. Western scholars, adventurers, and seekers began traveling to Asia, studying Buddhist texts and practicing meditation. Figures like the German-born monk Nyanaponika Thera in Sri Lanka and the Japanese Zen master Shunryu Suzuki in California became bridges between East and West. They translated not just words but entire frameworks of understanding, helping Westerners grasp concepts that had no ready equivalents in European languages. Books like Suzuki's Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind introduced millions to Buddhist ideas, presenting them in ways that resonated with Western psychology and philosophy while remaining true to their contemplative roots. The Tibetan diaspora, beginning with China's invasion of Tibet in 1950 and the Dalai Lama's flight to India in 1959, had an unexpected consequence: it spread Tibetan Buddhism worldwide. Forced from their homeland, Tibetan teachers established centers in India, Nepal, Europe, and the Americas. What had been a relatively closed tradition, practiced in mountain monasteries, suddenly became accessible to anyone with interest. Teachers like Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who moved to America and founded Naropa University, and Sogyal Rinpoche, author of the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, brought profound teachings on death, compassion, and the nature of mind to Western audiences. The tragedy of displacement became, in an unexpected way, an opportunity for these teachings to reach hearts that might never have encountered them otherwise. Mindfulness meditation, which had been primarily a monastic practice in Asia, became increasingly secularized in the West. In the 1970s, John Kabat-Zinn developed mindfulness-based stress reduction at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, teaching meditation to patients suffering from chronic pain, anxiety, and illness. By presenting mindfulness in medical and scientific terms rather than religious ones, he made it accessible to people who might never have considered Buddhist practice. Research began to accumulate showing measurable benefits: reduced stress, improved immune function, changes in brain structure associated with emotional regulation. This secular mindfulness movement has now reached millions through hospitals, schools, corporations, and therapy offices, even as debates continue about what's gained and lost when contemplative practices are separated from their ethical and philosophical context. The concept of engaged Buddhism emerged in the 20th century, particularly through the work of Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh. During the Vietnam War, Thich Nhat Hanh and his fellow monastics refused to take sides, instead helping war victims regardless of their affiliation. He coined the term engaged Buddhism to describe a practice that doesn't withdraw from the world's suffering but actively works to relieve it through social action, peacemaking, and service. He taught that meditation and mindfulness aren't escapes from reality but ways of developing the clarity and compassion needed to respond skillfully to injustice and suffering. His approach influenced Buddhist teachers worldwide and helped reshape how many practitioners understood the relationship between inner transformation and outer action. Buddhism's encounter with Western psychology has been particularly fruitful. Therapists and psychologists found in Buddhist psychology a sophisticated map of the mind developed through centuries of introspective investigation. Concepts like mindfulness, non-attachment, and self-compassion found their way into therapeutic approaches like dialectical behavior therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy. Meanwhile, Buddhist teachers began using psychological language to make teachings more accessible, speaking of trauma, emotional regulation, and healthy relationships. This cross-pollination has enriched both traditions, though it's also raised questions about whether Buddhism is a religion, a philosophy, a psychology, or all of these at once. The Buddha's teachings on dependent origination, or praditya samutpada, represent one of his most profound insights. This principle states that all phenomena arise dependent on causes and conditions. Nothing exists independently or in isolation. The Buddha described this as a chain of 12 links. Ignorance conditions mental formations, which condition consciousness, which conditions name and form, which condition the 6 sense bases, which condition contact, which condition feeling, which condition craving, which condition clinging, which condition becoming, which condition birth, which condition aging and death. Each link in the chain depends on the previous one, and together they explain how beings remain trapped in samsara, the cycle of birth and death. But the chain can be broken. If ignorance is replaced with wisdom, the entire cycle unravels, and liberation becomes possible. One of the most beloved texts in all of Buddhism is the Dhammapada, a collection of verses attributed to the Buddha himself. These short, memorable teachings have been translated into countless languages and memorized by millions of practitioners. They begin with the famous words, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become." The verses cover every aspect of the path: discipline, wisdom, mindfulness, loving kindness, always in language that's both poetic and practical. For nearly 2,000 years, people have turned to the Dhammapada for guidance, finding in its verses both inspiration and instruction for living wisely. The practice of meditation retreats, where practitioners devote extended time to intensive practice, has ancient roots but has become particularly important in modern Buddhism. In Theravada countries, meditation retreat centers offer courses in Vipassana meditation, often following the method taught by teachers like S.N. Goenka or in the tradition of Mahasi Sayadaw. These retreats typically involve 10 days or more of silence, with many hours of sitting and walking meditation each day, minimal sleep, and no reading, writing, or other distractions. The intensity of such practice can lead to profound insights as well as difficult challenges, as layers of mental conditioning are stripped away and practitioners come face to face with the workings of their own minds. Many people describe such retreats as among the most transformative experiences of their lives. Buddhism's relationship with science has become increasingly important in recent decades. The Dalai Lama has been particularly active in fostering dialogue between Buddhist contemplatives and neuroscientists, physicists, and psychologists. The Mind and Life Institute, founded in 1987, has sponsored dozens of conferences bringing together scientists and Buddhist scholars to explore consciousness, emotion, ethics, and the nature of reality. Studies of long-term meditators have shown measurable changes in brain function and structure, particularly in areas associated with attention, emotional regulation, and empathy. Physicists have found intriguing resonances between Buddhist concepts of emptiness and interdependence and quantum mechanics' understanding of reality. While Buddhism and science ask different kinds of questions and use different methods, both share a commitment to investigating reality as it actually is rather than as we wish it to be. The question of whether Buddhism is a religion or a philosophy continues to be debated. Buddhism has no creator God, no divine revelation, no appeal to supernatural authority, at least in its earliest forms. The Buddha explicitly discouraged blind faith and encouraged personal investigation. This can make Buddhism seem more like a philosophy or a psychological system than a religion in the Western sense. Yet Buddhism also includes devotional practices, rituals, prayers, cosmologies with various realms and beings, and belief in rebirth and karma. Perhaps the question itself is misguided, based on Western categories that don't quite fit. Buddhism might be better understood as a path of practice and awakening that includes philosophical investigation, ethical training, meditative discipline, and communal ritual, a complete way of life oriented toward liberation from suffering. Let yourself breathe softly now, feeling the vastness of this tradition that has touched so many lives across so many centuries, each person finding in it what they needed, each generation passing it on to the next, and still the teachings continue, living not just in books and monasteries but in the hearts of practitioners who sit quietly, who walk mindfully, who extend compassion to themselves and others, keeping alive that flame the Buddha lit beneath the Bodhi tree. The Buddhist concept of the 6 realms describes different states of existence through which beings cycle in samsara. These realms can be understood both literally, as actual places of rebirth, and metaphorically, as psychological states we experience even in this life. There's the God realm, characterized by pleasure and pride but ultimately unsatisfying because even divine life is impermanent. The jealous God realm is marked by competition and envy. The human realm, considered the most precious, offers both suffering and joy, creating ideal conditions for spiritual practice. The animal realm represents states of ignorance and instinct. The hungry ghost realm depicts insatiable craving, beings with huge bellies and tiny mouths who can never satisfy their hunger. And the hell realm represents states of intense anger and suffering. Understanding these realms helps practitioners recognize these states in their own minds and work to liberate themselves from all of them. One of the most important holidays in Buddhism is Vesak, also called Buddha Day, which celebrates the Buddha's birth, enlightenment, and death, all traditionally said to have occurred on the full moon of the same lunar month. On this day, Buddhists around the world visit temples, offer food to monks, light candles and lanterns, and recommit themselves to practicing the teachings. In some countries, caged birds are released as a symbolic act of liberation. In others, people pour water over Buddha statues in a ritual washing that represents purification. The celebration varies from culture to culture, but everywhere it's a time to remember the Buddha's life and teachings and to reflect on one's own practice and progress. The tradition of Buddhist art spans millennia and continents, from the colossal stone Buddhas carved into cliff faces in Bamiyan, Afghanistan, tragically destroyed by the Taliban in 2001, to delicate Thangka paintings in Tibet, to the serene Buddha images of Thailand and the bold Zen calligraphy of Japan. Each artistic tradition developed its own iconography and style, yet all aimed at the same purpose, to inspire practice, to teach the Dharma visually, and to create sacred space. The hand gestures, or mudras, seen in Buddha statues each carry specific meanings: the earth-touching mudra of enlightenment, the teaching mudra with hands forming a wheel, the meditation mudra with hands resting in the lap, the fearlessness mudra with palm raised outward. These images weren't meant as idols to worship but as reminders of awakened qualities that exist within all beings. Buddhist monasteries developed into centers not just of spiritual practice but of learning, art, and social welfare. The great Nalanda University in India, which flourished from the 5th to 12th centuries, attracted thousands of students from across Asia who came to study Buddhist philosophy, logic, medicine, and arts. The library was said to contain hundreds of thousands of texts. When the monastery was destroyed by invaders, it burned for months, so vast was its collection. Similar institutions arose throughout the Buddhist world. In Tibet, massive monasteries like Sera, Drepung, and Ganden became cities unto themselves, housing thousands of monks engaged in rigorous philosophical debate and meditation. In Japan, temple complexes preserved culture through centuries of upheaval. These institutions showed how Buddhism could create entire civilizations oriented toward wisdom and compassion. The practice of prostrations, where practitioners bow down fully to the ground, appears in various Buddhist traditions. In Tibetan Buddhism, practitioners might perform 100,000 full-body prostrations as a preliminary practice, each one accompanied by prayers and visualizations. This isn't servile submission but a profound practice of letting go of pride, of physically embodying humility and devotion. Each prostration reminds the practitioner that the ego they defend so carefully is just another empty, constructed phenomenon. The physical challenge of thousands of prostrations also builds perseverance and breaks through layers of resistance. What begins as an external practice gradually works its way inward, transforming the heart. Buddhism's teachings on death and dying have always been central to the tradition. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, properly called the Bardo Thodol or Liberation Through Hearing in the Intermediate State, is a text meant to be read to dying or deceased persons to guide them through the experiences after death. It describes the bardos, the intermediate states between death and rebirth, and provides instructions for recognizing the clear light of reality that appears at the moment of death. If this opportunity for liberation is missed, the text guides the consciousness through increasingly dense visions and experiences, always offering chances to recognize the illusory nature of appearances and achieve liberation or at least a favorable rebirth. Whether understood literally or metaphorically, these teachings encourage practitioners to prepare for death by living with awareness, understanding impermanence, and cultivating the ability to recognize the nature of mind. The role of chanting and liturgy in Buddhism varies greatly between traditions. In Tibetan Buddhism, monks engage in deep, harmonic chanting that can produce multiple tones simultaneously, creating an otherworldly resonance. In Pure Land Buddhism, practitioners chant Namo Amitabha Buddha thousands of times, each repetition a prayer for rebirth in Amitabha's Pure Land. In Zen monasteries, sutras are chanted daily in a rhythmic, melodic style. These practices aren't mere ritual but forms of meditation, ways of focusing the mind, creating devotion, and embodying the teachings. The vibrations of chanting are said to calm the mind and open the heart. Even if the words aren't fully understood intellectually, the practice of chanting can create profound shifts in consciousness and cultivate connection with the tradition's lineage stretching back to the Buddha himself. Buddhism spread to the West not just through Asian teachers coming to America and Europe but through Western seekers traveling to Asia. In the 1960s and 70s, thousands of young people journeyed to India, Nepal, Thailand, and Japan seeking spiritual experiences. Some stayed for years, ordaining as monks and nuns, studying languages, and practicing intensively. When they returned home, they brought not just ideas but lived experience of Buddhist practice. Teachers like Jack Kornfield, Joseph Goldstein, and Sharon Salzberg spent years training in Burma before returning to America and founding the Insight Meditation Society in Massachusetts. Similar stories played out across the West, creating a new generation of Western Buddhist teachers who could translate the Dharma into contemporary language and address the specific spiritual needs of modern Western students. The concept of Buddha nature, particularly emphasized in Mahayana Buddhism, teaches that all beings possess the inherent capacity for awakening. This isn't something we need to create or acquire from outside, but rather something we need to recognize and uncover, like gold buried in dirt. Some schools teach that Buddha nature is already fully present and perfect, we're already enlightened but don't realize it. Others say it's a potential that must be developed through practice. But all agree that no being is fundamentally separate from awakening, that enlightenment isn't reserved for a special few but is the birthright of all conscious beings. This teaching has profound implications. If everyone possesses Buddha nature, then everyone deserves respect, compassion, and the opportunity to awaken. Even those who cause harm are seen not as fundamentally evil but as suffering from ignorance of their true nature. Buddhist ethics are grounded in the understanding that actions have consequences, not because of divine judgment but through natural causality. The intention behind an action matters as much as the action itself. A harmful action done unknowingly creates less severe karmic consequences than one done deliberately. This is why the development of wisdom and mindfulness is so crucial. They allow us to see clearly what's happening and respond skillfully rather than reactively. Buddhist ethics also emphasize the interconnectedness of all beings. When we harm others, we harm ourselves. Not in some mystical sense but because we strengthen patterns of hatred and violence in our own minds. When we help others, we cultivate generosity and compassion in ourselves. Ethics isn't about following rules to earn rewards but about understanding how our actions shape both our world and our own character. Let your body settle even more deeply now, releasing any remaining tension, allowing yourself to be held by the earth beneath you, as generations of practitioners have sat and lain before you, each one working toward freedom in their own way. And the path continues, winding through mountains and cities, through temples and living rooms, through ancient texts and present moments, always inviting us to wake up, to see clearly, to love fully. The practice of loving kindness, or metta, has roots in one of the Buddha's most beautiful teachings, the Metta Sutta. In this discourse, the Buddha describes the qualities of one who is skilled in goodness. They should be capable and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened and living simply. The Sutta then offers the famous metta phrases, may all beings be happy. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings live in safety. May all beings live with ease. These aren't merely wishes but a training of the heart, a deliberate cultivation of boundless friendliness toward all living things. The Buddha taught that one who practices metta will sleep easily, wake easily, dream no evil dreams, and be dear to both human and non-human beings, practical benefits of a transformed heart. In Zen Buddhism, the concept of mu, or nothing, plays a central role in practice. One of the most famous koans asks, a monk asked Master Joshu, Does a dog have Buddha nature? Joshua answered, Moo. Students might spend years sitting with this single syllable, not trying to solve it intellectually but allowing it to penetrate deeper and deeper until the conceptual mind exhausts itself and something beyond thought emerges. Mu isn't a logical answer but a gateway, a word that points beyond all words. Working with koans like this is meant to bring students to the edge of what the thinking mind can grasp and then push them beyond that edge into direct realization. The tradition of forest monks, particularly in Thailand, represents a return to the Buddha's original mode of practice. These monks, following teachers like Ajahn Mun and Ajahn Chah, live simply in forests and remote areas, sleeping under trees or in small huts, eating once a day from their alms rounds, dedicating themselves entirely to meditation and Dhamma study. Ajahn Chah, who died in 1992, became particularly influential in bringing this tradition to the West. His teachings emphasized simplicity, awareness, and letting go. He once said, "If you let go a little, you will have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you will have a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you will have complete peace." His monasteries, including branches now established in Europe, America, and Australia, continue this tradition of renunciation and intensive practice. The concept of the paramithas, or perfections, outlines the qualities a bodhisattva cultivates on the path to awakening. There are traditionally 6 perfections, though some lists expand to 10. These are generosity, giving freely without expectation of return, ethical conduct, living with integrity and harmlessness, patience, remaining steady in the face of difficulties, joyful effort, persevering with diligence and energy, meditative concentration, developing stability and clarity of mind, and wisdom, seeing reality as it truly is. Some traditions add skillful means, aspirational prayers, spiritual power, and transcendent knowledge. These aren't separate qualities to master one by one but interconnected virtues that mature together over time. Each one supports the others. Wisdom guides generosity, patience enables effort, concentration deepens wisdom. Buddhism's engagement with environmental issues has grown significantly in recent decades. Teachers and communities have drawn on Buddhist principles of interdependence and compassion to address climate change, species extinction, and ecological destruction. The concept of interbeing, a term coined by Thich Nhat Hanh, captures this beautifully. We don't exist separately from nature but are interwoven with all life. When we harm the environment, we harm ourselves. When we protect it, we protect all beings. Buddhist communities have established eco-monasteries, engaged in tree-planting ceremonies, advocated for animal rights, and developed eco-dharma teachings that show how Buddhist practice naturally leads to caring for the earth. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has called environmental protection a question of human survival and urged Buddhists to take responsibility for the planet's well-being. The practice of walking meditation offers a beautiful complement to sitting practice. Instead of sitting still, practitioners walk very slowly, paying careful attention to each sensation, the lifting of the foot, the moving forward, the placing down, the shifting of weight. This isn't walking to get somewhere but walking is meditation itself, each step an opportunity for mindfulness. In some traditions, practitioners walk between periods of sitting meditation to keep energy balanced. In others, walking meditation is a primary practice. Thich Nhat Hanh taught walking as if you are kissing the earth with your feet, bringing tenderness and awareness to each step. This practice helps us bring meditation into movement, into daily life, showing that awakening isn't confined to the meditation cushion but can infuse every activity. The Lotus Sutra, one of Mahayana Buddhism's most influential texts, teaches that all beings will eventually attain Buddhahood, not just monks or exceptional practitioners but everyone, without exception. It presents the parable of the burning house. A father lures his children from a burning building by promising them beautiful toy carts outside. Once they're safe, he gives them something far better, magnificent carriages drawn by white oxen. The Buddha's teachings are like this, the sutra says. They meet beings where they are, offering teachings suited to their capacity, all leading ultimately to the same destination of complete awakening. The Lotus Sutra proclaims that even the Buddha's death was a skillful teaching device, that in reality the Buddha is eternal, always present, always teaching. This text has inspired countless practitioners with its message of universal salvation and the Buddha's infinite compassion. In Theravada Buddhism, the stages of enlightenment are precisely mapped. The first stage is stream entry, when a practitioner has their first direct glimpse of nirvana and becomes certain of the path. Such a person will be reborn at most 7 more times before reaching full liberation. The second stage is once returner, having greatly weakened sensual desire and ill will. The third stage is non-returner, having completely eliminated these lower fetters and destined to reach full awakening from a celestial realm. The fourth and final stage is arahant, a fully awakened being who has eliminated all fetters and will experience no more rebirth after death. These stages aren't achievements to boast about. In fact, claiming attainments one hasn't reached is a serious violation of monastic discipline, but a map showing the progressive deepening of freedom as different layers of delusion fall away. The development of Western Buddhism has raised important questions about adaptation and authenticity. How much can Buddhism change to fit Western culture while remaining true to its essence? Some teachers have stripped away Asian cultural elements, presenting a thoroughly secularized, psychologically oriented practice. Others maintain traditional forms, including devotional elements, cosmology, and ritual. Still others seek a middle way, preserving core teachings and practices while allowing forms to evolve naturally. Questions arise about hierarchy, gender equality, financial transparency, and the role of monasticism in societies without strong traditions of supporting renunciates. These aren't settled questions but ongoing conversations as Buddhism continues to take root in new soil, just as it has done throughout its history. The simple act of taking refuge is how one formally becomes a Buddhist. Taking refuge means declaring one's commitment to the 3 jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Taking refuge in the Buddha doesn't mean worshipping him as a god but looking to him as the one who showed the path. Taking refuge in the Dharma means committing to study and practice the teachings. Taking refuge in the Sangha means relying on the community of practitioners for support and guidance. The traditional phrases are simple: I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. These words, repeated by millions across centuries, represent both a beginning and a return, beginning the formal path while returning to something we've always known, the possibility of freedom from suffering. Let your breath become even softer now, barely noticeable, like a whisper of wind through leaves, as you rest in the stillness that holds all things. We're approaching the end of our journey together through these teachings, but the path itself continues forever, each moment offering a fresh opportunity to awaken, to see, to love. The practice of tea ceremony in Zen Buddhism transformed the simple act of preparing and drinking tea into a meditation on presence, simplicity, and appreciation. Developed in Japan by monks like Zen-no Rikyu in the 16th century, the tea ceremony embodies core Zen principles: harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. Every gesture is deliberate and meaningful: the way the bowl is turned, how the whisk moves through the water, the quiet appreciation between host and guest. The tea room itself is designed to foster mindfulness, with its low doorway that requires even nobles to bow in humility, its simple decorations, its atmosphere of rustic refinement. This isn't about tea at all, really, but about being fully present to this moment, this action, this breath. As one Zen master said, "When you drink tea, just drink tea." Buddhism has always recognized different temperaments and paths suited to different people. Some are drawn to study and intellectual understanding, carefully analyzing the nature of reality through philosophy and logic. Others are drawn to devotion, opening their hearts through faith and surrender to the Buddha or to Bodhisattvas. Still others are drawn to meditation, developing concentration and insight through direct observation of mind and body. And some are naturally inclined towards service and compassionate action in the world. The beauty of Buddhism is that it honors all these paths, understanding that they're not competing approaches but different doors into the same house. What matters isn't which door you enter through, but that you keep walking toward awakening. The tradition of Dharma transmission in Zen represents the passing of realization from teacher to student across generations, creating an unbroken lineage stretching back to the Buddha himself. When a student demonstrates profound understanding, the teacher may perform a ceremony formally acknowledging this realization and authorizing the student to teach. This transmission isn't about transferring information but recognizing that the student has touched the same reality the teacher has touched, the same truth the Buddha awakened to beneath the Bodhi tree. Lineage charts trace these transmissions like family trees, showing how the Dharma has been kept alive through personal relationships, through intimate teacher-student encounters where something wordless was recognized and passed on. The concept of beginner's mind, emphasized particularly in Zen but relevant to all Buddhist practice, suggests that expertise can become an obstacle. When we think we know something thoroughly, we stop seeing it freshly. We overlay our concepts onto reality rather than meeting reality directly. Beginner's mind is approaching each moment as if for the first time, with openness, curiosity, and wonder. The sky you've seen 10,000 times becomes new when you release your assumptions about it. Your breath becomes fascinating when you set aside what you think you know. This doesn't mean pretending to be ignorant but rather holding knowledge lightly, remaining open to surprise, staying humble before the vastness of what can be known. Buddhist psychology identifies what are called the 5 hindrances, common obstacles that arise in meditation and in life: sensory desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, and doubt. These aren't moral failings but natural mental states that obscure clarity. The practice isn't to fight against them forcefully but to recognize them when they arise, understand their nature, and respond skillfully. Sensory desire might be met with contemplating impermanence. Ill will might be countered with loving-kindness practice. Sloth might need energizing through standing or walking meditation. Restlessness might need calming through focusing on the breath. Doubt might need encouragement through recalling past successes or seeking guidance. Learning to work skillfully with these hindrances is essential to deepening practice. The role of monasticism in Buddhism has been central from the beginning, yet the relationship between monastics and lay people is deeply reciprocal. Monks and nuns dedicate their lives to practice and study, preserving and transmitting the teachings. Lay people support them with food, shelter, and material necessities. But the exchange isn't one-sided. Lay people gain merit through generosity and receive teachings and inspiration from monastics. Monastics depend on lay people's support and offer the gift of the Dharma in return. This mutual support has sustained Buddhism for 25 centuries, creating communities where spiritual practice is honored and those who dedicate themselves fully to it are protected and valued. One of Buddhism's great contributions to human understanding is its detailed analysis of suffering. The Pali term dukkha, usually translated as suffering, actually encompasses a spectrum from intense anguish to subtle unsatisfactoriness. There's the dukkha of painful experiences, illness, loss, disappointment. There's the dukkha of change, even pleasant experiences end, leaving us wanting more. And there's the dukkha of conditioned existence itself, the fundamental incompleteness of a life built on clinging to what's impermanent. This isn't pessimism but honest recognition. And crucially, the Buddha didn't stop at diagnosing suffering, he showed the way out. Understanding dukkha isn't meant to make us depressed but to motivate us toward freedom. The practice of bowing, so common in Buddhist cultures, expresses gratitude, respect, and the letting go of self-importance. When you bow to a teacher, you're not worshipping them but honoring the Dharma they embody and your own potential for awakening. When you bow to a Buddha statue, you're connecting with the awakened qualities it represents. When you bow to the meditation hall or even to your cushion before sitting, you're expressing respect for the space and opportunity to practice. Some traditions teach that when you bow, the Buddha you're bowing to and the Buddha doing the bowing are one. Subject and object dissolve into simple, wholehearted action. A bow becomes a moment of complete presence, ego momentarily released. Throughout history, Buddhist practitioners have created sand mandalas, intricate geometric designs made from colored sand that take days or weeks to complete. In Tibetan Buddhism, monks work together with intense concentration, carefully placing millions of grains of sand to create elaborate depictions of celestial palaces and divine figures. These mandalas are stunningly beautiful, masterpieces of sacred art. And when they're completed, after all that painstaking work, they're swept away and the sand is poured into a river. This isn't destruction but teaching, a vivid demonstration of impermanence, non-attachment, and the importance of the process over the product. All composite things, no matter how beautiful, eventually come apart. What matters is the mindfulness, devotion, and skill brought to each moment of creation. As we come near the end of our journey together, it's worth remembering that Buddhism isn't ultimately about beliefs or concepts but about practice and realization. The Buddha compared his teachings to a raft that carries you across a river. Once you've reached the other shore, you don't need to carry the raft on your back. The teachings are tools, skillful means to point toward truth, but they're not truth itself. Truth must be touched directly, known intimately, lived fully. This is why Buddhism has survived and thrived for 2.5 millennia. Not because people believe in it but because people practice it and discover for themselves that it works, that the path leads where it promises, that freedom from suffering is truly possible. And so we return, finally, to where we began, with a man sitting beneath a tree, seeking an end to suffering. That man found what he sought and spent his life offering it to others. The path he discovered hasn't been worn smooth by the passage of time but remains fresh, available, alive. Every moment offers the opportunity to wake up, to see clearly, to respond with wisdom and compassion. The Buddha's final words echo across the centuries: all conditioned things are subject to decay. Strive on with diligence. Not as a grim duty but as an invitation, even a celebration. You have this precious life, this consciousness, this moment. What will you do with it? Let yourself rest completely now, breathing gently, held by the earth, connected to all beings who have ever sought truth, who have ever reached for freedom, who have ever loved deeply enough to wish for the happiness of all. May you be peaceful. May you be happy. May you be free from suffering. May you know your own true nature. May all beings everywhere know peace, and as you drift into sleep, know that the Dharma continues, that somewhere in the world, someone is sitting in meditation, someone is chanting ancient verses, someone is taking their first steps on this path, and someone is touching awakening. The river of practice flows on, and you are part of it, held in an embrace that spans continents and centuries, connected to all who have ever sought the light. Sleep well, sleep peacefully. Tomorrow the practice continues, but for now, rest.